Greetings to those of you who are watching on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in that way. Greetings also to anybody who might be watching on our live stream closed circuit around campus. And again, I'm so excited to be with you today on this July 2nd of the 2023 year. For those who are new, you would not necessarily know, but I have a rotation of themes that we use rather than readings in order to straddle the various wisdom traditions that we try to represent here. And the themes align in a wacky way with the calendar year, and I try to just let them do whatever they're going to do. So I thought about meddling with that and bringing my freedom topic to today, but I elected not to do that. So the topic that pops up in my rotation today is a meaningful word for me, reconciliation. And then I have in mind also to try and have in mind reconciliation as a thing that brings independence. And I think that actually works, but you have to let me know. So the other problem I have this morning is that I could talk for way too long, so I'll try to be brief. But I'm only moderately successful at that in any given week. So I believe that the concept of neighbor is one that you see especially in the Abrahamic faiths, in Islam and Judaism and Christianity, as a major predominating focus of the sacred texts. And also, many of you know, for example, the golden rule idea of, notion of guiding our own conduct to both not mistreat others if we would prefer to not be mistreated, but then in a positive statement to say we should do for others what we would like done for us. And this notion of our relationship with the other is where, at a surface level, reconciliation enters into the day-to-day concerns of our lives. Because as I was driving up this morning, I was chuckling. I thought of the Star Wars phrase, "There's a disturbance in the Force." And that's vague, and yet it gets right at what I want to talk about, which is that disturbance in the harmony of our relationship with another is one place where reconciliation can be sought. But there are other forms of disturbance, and when we train chaplains and teach about spirituality here at Caron, one of the things that we do is we propose that spirituality is pretty much synonymous with connectedness. And I think that there's immense depth in that observation. And in that sense, disturbance is misconnectedness. It's problematic dynamics in a connection. And there's an acronym that I like to bring about when I do chaplain training or training on this notion of spirituality as connectedness, and the acronym is SONG, nicely helpful with the music that we just heard. But the SONG acronym is Self, Others, Nature, God. And the notion is that human beings experience connectedness. We're like, one way of thinking about the human experience is in connection. It begins in infancy with the womb and then the birth, and already that can begin to get complicated. We begin our lives in trauma, and that's only the beginning of all of the different ways in which our connectedness suffers. And an important piece of data there is that addiction manifests as misconnectedness. Many people think, addiction is disconnectedness. Because if you try to take the addict's thing away from them, you will get the ferocious response. And that is a clue that as addicted persons, we are really connected, but we're really connected to things and behaviors that are not conducive to the flourishing of our lives. So, I'm jumping all around the things I had thought I would say, which is fine. The the insight that I had on the way up here was also to try and move as quickly as I could to the real issues of difficulty in relationship that you have. Because that's where it really is important and where the theme would find some sort of shortening of time. You come to Caron because your life has been affected as a bystander, co-participant, or as a sufferer of this phenomenon that we call a use disorder. And language continues to change and evolve, and how we understand it and how we treat it continues to change and evolve. But addiction is a perfectly good word in my mind. And the phenomenon of addiction is a maladaptive survival strategy. We find ourselves trying to get high, gamble, do all those things out of, it like seems like the right thing to do at any given moment. And then unfortunately the brain's capacity to become habituated to these maladaptive sort of forms of behavior is what addiction starts to look like. So we ended up in this predicament because we were trying to make it through a difficult life. And it doesn't help a great deal to shame ourselves with like, God, that was stupid, but it sure looks like that from the outside. And yet there's an unavoidable necessity for the person who's suffering. It's like, I know I shouldn't do this, but here I am doing it. Wake up the next morning, I'm like, I shouldn't do it again, but there I am doing it. And it causes harm. It causes harm in all of the SONG domains. It causes harm, so it's a disturbance in the force for me with myself. It's a disturbance in my interpersonal relationships. And I'm betting, those of you who are in the audience here can talk all day about that too, how much addiction sucks. And how painful it's been, and how alienating it's been, and how it's like really pulls people back in, even when you try to sort of push it out. And then I think people struggle with natural theology and philosophy and ecology just generally in our time. But the word intoxication could be interpreted as in poisoning. And so at a very basic level, when we are using substances in an unhealthy way, we are poisoning ourselves. We're out of alignment with healthy diet. And then, sleep cycles get dysregulated, and mental health issues like seasonal affective disorder. The human being under addiction is out of harmony with the natural world. And finally, or first, I was going to say I'd like to flip the acronym around, but it doesn't work. So, GNOS, right? The divine, our relationship with the transcendent, which the Star Wars Force is a way of conceiving, is what fundamentally is a way of thinking about how everything else is out of whack. And so if you want to think about reconciliation, it's a big problem because it's so pervasive. It's affected probably all these areas of your life. And it doesn't mean that you're deficient or there's something wrong with you, because I think it affects all areas of human life. I think there's a beautiful word in Buddhism's translation into English. Most of the wisdom traditions that we talk about in English came in other languages, and I don't know the Pali and Sanskrit and Hebrew and Greek, all of them, but anyway, the word that's used in Buddhist circles is equanimity. I love that word because I want equanimity. And one of my forms of being out of equanimity is my jealousy for people who display equanimity. So, I exhibit the paradox of the desire to be without desire, right? And so I don't know how you get out of those loops, but to be chill, that's what my kids and grandkids talk about. Like, dude, chill, man. And there is meat on those bones. There is something desirable about not being ruffled by the realities of the existence in which we find ourselves. And it's really hard to be unruffled. And we are bombarded in the media and in our current sphere with encouragement to polarity, right? Like, so it's like, you take a side, and you take a side, and let me remember to stay here, because I could just go off on politics and holy wars and all that stuff. Human beings have been struggling with polarization forever. Montagues and Capulets and, Hatfields and McCoys, but in a very practical way, this is an issue today. How do the people who come to Caron find peace in the disturbances of their connectednesses? And it's hard. One of the deep truths about this is that it doesn't mean everybody has to be kumbaya. That's a hard insight for me to get to. But I do want to say that I think I, as a young person, assumed that what reconciliation meant was everybody hangs out and parties together after whatever the reconciliation process is. But that isn't necessarily what it needs to be. And some of you may be able to find relief, and some of you may find fear in me saying that. But there is a way to become at peace and be at distance. And sometimes that's the only way to come to be at peace. And sometimes it's the wise thing, right? If we have an abuser and an abused dynamic happening, then reconciliation can be about healthy boundaries and about no longer having to live and walk in fear that clouds and causes us to have an existence that is just burdened by the crap that we have suffered and has this imagined enemy on the wall. So coming to equanimity, coming to peace, is a more nuanced thing. Because of course, in a huge number of instances that happen with the disenchantments and disturbances that play out here, reconciliation does mean husband and wife are back together, or kids end up being back in right relationship with their parents, or adults become in right relationship with their aging parents, or whatever. Like, and a lot of times it is hunky-dory and kumbaya. But the discernment of how that's going to play out is part of the wisdom that attends to these processes of reconciliation that I think are so interesting. And in the 1930s, there were a couple of gentlemen that devised together a plan to free themselves from their captivity to alcohol by seeking to help other people who were suffering similarly. And this was the genesis of the movement that today is called the 12-step movement, and its core expression in Alcoholics Anonymous was two people who were trapped and thought that their engagement in a service relationship with other people similarly trapped would give them a freedom from the entrapment that they were experiencing. So there's the neighbor thing, right? That's a beautiful way in which the neighbor relationship begins to be part of the healing of the self. And it also starts fixing the world, and it decreases the malicious use of substances. All those connectednesses are there in that little triangle. Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob Smith, and Bill D, AA number 3 was the guy's name, as he's referred to in this sacred tradition. But over time, more would be fleshed out about how to sustain abstinence long term. Never would the movement abandon the basic notion of service as a fundamental principle. But somewhere around 4 years into this ministry, I'll call it, of outreach, Bill and the peers who were succeeding to stay sober worked together to support Bill in writing a document, which becomes the book Alcoholics Anonymous, which is pivotal, and we give a copy of it to every patient who comes here. And most of them, even if they're not going to use AA, are encouraged to read at least parts of it. And in that, there are all these things about spirituality and connectedness and disturbance in relationships and the foundational phenomenon of addiction, obsession, and compulsion. There's also a path charted for freedom from active addiction. And the path is right up there on the wall, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And you might be surprised to know that that continues here 80 plus years later to be integral to most treatment providers' counsel to sufferers from addictive phenomena, including the families, is that there's a secret sauce up there on that wall. There's a magic that brings about a degree of equanimity, a degree of restoration of relationship, a degree of chill, a degree of harmony. And the very first thing that happens when people stop drinking is dysregulation. Just like when you have an infant and you take the bottle away from the baby when the baby is trying to nurse on the bottle, you get, this is what happens to the people with the wristband around now. So we have them in a 28-day container, and they're often, there's 3 words that AA uses to describe this in 1939, so apt that we remember them today: restless, irritable, and discontented. And this is described by these 2 gentlemen in 1939 in their small cohort as the sort of natural state of the alcoholic without alcohol. Crabby, because you've taken a key survival mechanism away. So now you've increased the disturbance. And what method besides return to alcohol would present itself to not have the return to alcohol cause yet more calamitous outcomes? Well, a path of healing in connectednesses that I was saying, GNOS, right, that goes sort of in that order. So in the first 3 of the 12 steps, there's a lot of spirituality, and there's a reconciling with self that happens, but the real reconciliation with self. So it's really GSON. That's like the right reordering of the acronym. If you want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and the 12 steps up on the wall. Because in the first 3 steps, in addition to deciding that one wants to seek help from this entrapment, one is encouraged to use the force loop and to come to believe that there is power to help in a comprehensive way. And then in 4, 5, and then 6, 7, there's a deep look inside. And so this is where you find these truisms in philosophical traditions that you can't love another person until you learn to love yourself, right? And this is where many of our folks have real trouble, not only with eye contact with another person, but even with eye contact with themselves. There are tons of patients who like brush their teeth looking down at the sink instead of having a moment in the mirror. And if we tell them, like, why don't you look at the mirror and tell yourself, I love myself? And people are like, no. And that's not only because it sounds weird and Stuart Smalley-ish, but it's because there's a fundamental shame that has emerged in the journey of this disconnectedness that is even with ourselves. We don't like the person that we see in the mirror, and we're not happy with the way he or she is conducting themselves. But a movement to that, so repair, I don't think the repair of the neighbor thing can happen until the repair of the self thing begins to happen. And by the way, I don't think you have to get any of these completely, but it's like you need to have the process on board. So I think you do need to have a spiritual, like, okay, I'm entertaining the notion that the universe will support me as I move in this direction, and then I'm entertaining that I'm worthy of like some healing and love and forgiveness, and then you can get right about it. You can get right into the like, who have I harmed, and what is the right discernment here? Do we need to part in civil ways, or do we find a way to come back together and mend the hurts that we've had? So I happen to have been blessed to have been on the beach, sorry people, but on Friday morning. And I was trying to get my mind about, which is a terrible thing to work on the beach, Jack, but I knew I was coming here to speak, and I was looking out early in the morning on Friday down in southern Delaware on the Atlantic coast. You'd have thought I was on the bay. There were like tiny little waves, and the sea was just like glass. It's a magic time on the ocean. If you're ever on a boat and you could be out on the ocean when it is like still like that, it is amazing. And it's the perfect time to do things like kayaking or, paddling or whatever. And there was a person who was on I think they call them like a paddleboard, standing, and I was like, oh, I want to do that right now. And what I thought was that was a visual for me of how equanimity brings freedom. When the sea is not disturbed, when there's no disturbance in the forest, that person can not only have balance, but can go anywhere they would choose. Whereas in the board, they can't even get up on the board. And this is why the corollary of that is that we who are not in harmony are trapped in the tethers that hold us with the resentments that we have. And they may be very old. Like you might still be pissed off at the person who pulled the chair out from underneath of you, this is me, when I was in grade school. I still remember the dude's name, which is sad. And I had prayed to let that go. But here it is coming up. I'm like, why are you talking about this, Jack? And it's because I'm imperfect, right? And yet I believe that the thing that I'm saying is true, that we are tethered by the resentments that harbor themselves in the back of the soul and heart and mind. And the counting of wrongs and the harboring of that, like, I don't like this, or I don't like that person, is an entrapment. And that there is a real spiritual freedom in walking the path towards which greater healing comes from those things. And I'm not all about a magic wand thing. That was one of the things I realized early on this week, was that I cannot finish this message with just let it all go, people, because that is totally crap. If you see that on a Dr. Phil show or whatever, that's why I would encourage you to turn him off, is because I don't think it works that way. But I would encourage you to decide to embark on a path, and I believe a recovery Dharma path, or a smart recovery path, or a 12-step path. All of these are paths to personal freedom that bring personal freedom through this kind of reharmonization of our lives. And family members, you're not off the hook. It's not just that, because sadly you become entrapped, and you probably have this bitterness, and you may have very addictive presentations in your behaviors. And so I invite us all to envision, let this Independence Day be our independence from our contribution to the disturbances in the force immediately around us. We're not going to fix the politics. We're not going to fix the holy wars. We're not going to fix all that stuff. If you think you are, you have narcissistic tendencies and you might want to talk to somebody. But we have paths set in front of us that will bring us into greater equanimity and greater peace and love with one another. And in that place, the addictions will have less force, less need, and bring less hurt overall. May we indeed find greater freedom one day at a time. Thanks so much.